Coming soon to streaming.
We've reached the last movie of our April 2024 segment with Captain America, the Winter Soldier, and compared to the last three films, I don't really have near as much to say about this movie, nor the interesting trivia to tell that some of the others had. Don't get me wrong, this movie was a good, solid superhero movie, but that's probably the most I can say about it. It's a good, solid superhero movie. I really enjoyed it, but prior to rewatching it, I also found myself misremembering the film by trying to inject a whole bunch of Captain America's Civil War scenes into my memory of it. It was by no means forgettable because, again, I legitimately had a good time watching it, but trying to make a short review has surprisingly been a little more difficult for me, especially when this movie was released at the height of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's popularity. So I'm just going to talk about it, not really worry about all of the trivia, and give you my thoughts. But let's start with a recap. It seems Steve Rogers has settled into a new tentative peace following the alien invasion on New York a few years prior. Now in Washington, D.C., Steve is still adapting to the modern world and has immersed himself in S.H.I.E.L.D. as a pseudo-agent of sorts. When news of an unknown threat and their assassin dubbed the Winter Soldier threaten S.H.I.E.L.D. security, Steve finds his world once again turned upside down and calls on the assistance of Natasha Romanoff and ex-pilot Sam Wilson to sift through the treachery and lies. As it would turn out, Nazi organization Hydra has been pulling a lot of the strings from within S.H.I.E.L.D. and plan to use the newly developed defense system to neutralize their enemies, whilst using Steve's old friend Bucky from the good old days of the 1940s as a brainwashed puppet to carry out their evil deeds. Against all odds, the Avengers pull through, but at the expense of S.H.I.E.L.D. With the organization all but disbanded, Nick Fury and Natasha essentially go into hiding, and Steve and Sam set out to locate Bucky. It's definitely one of those movies where you need to watch the prior movies in order to really truly understand what's going on. At the very least, you definitely need to watch Steve's first movie, Captain America: The First Avenger. If you've never seen a Marvel movie before, it gives you enough knowledge to coherently get you through the Winter Soldier. Without it, you would be that one guy who constantly pauses the film to ask far too many questions to really warrant watching the sequel. Though it does give you a brief overview as to who and what Hydra is, it's hard to understand or appreciate just how bad they are, or Steve's long-standing rivalry with these people if you haven't at least seen the first Avenger. I mean, truly, you won't even really know who Steve is if you haven't seen the first movie. This film doesn't really bother to do much in the ways of hero or character development with either him or Bucky because they did all that in their first film. This one was really just a setup for the MCU moving forward. Like, who is this Peggy chick? Why does this masked eyeliner guy have amnesia? Why is Steve so small in the flashback? Go watch The First Soldier. You need to. And that's kind of the problem with all the Marvel movies, at least it starts to happen in Phase 2 of the MCU, barring Guardians of the Galaxy and Ant-Man. You can't watch these like they're standalones, you need to have watched the previous movies. The Winter Soldier is a textbook case of this, and you can see that they really started nailing in that MCU formula to a T in this movie as well. After 9 films, though, it's kind of expected. I think that might be why I say this movie is just solid and not fantastic. You knew exactly what was going to happen. It was very predictable. You may not know exactly how they're going to hit that story beat, but you know they're going to hit it somehow, some way. But they did it with enough superhero badassery that you still enjoyed it. Maybe I feel like it was so obvious now because I've seen at least 18 more Marvel movies since then, and it might have been a little less obvious back in 2014 because the formula was still new enough. It's possible. I just feel like between that and Steve's unfortunate fate of having heavy MCU plot development in his sequels instead of a movie all his own like some of the other Avengers is why I got it mixed up with Civil War so easily when I tried to recall this film. Which sucks because I actually enjoy this movie as a Captain America movie more than Civil War. I couldn't help but think this movie looked more realistic and, in my humble opinion, better than some of the other MCU movies, including some of the more recent ones. I couldn't exactly put my finger on what it was, maybe just extra phenomenal CGI, or the fantastic choreography in the badass combat sequence, and I found out afterwards that I was half right. Fantastic combat choreography, yes. Phenomenal CGI, also yes, but as minimally as possible. Directors Anthony and Joe Russo wanted to make as raw of a film as they could get, with as little CGI as they could get away with. Anthony Mackie, who plays Sam Wilson, aka Falcon, said that if they could perform it, they performed it. And if they could build it, that part of the set was built. And to me, it really truly showed. It was super refreshing to see scenes that weren't very clearly shot in green filming rooms to have everything later rendered in, or action sequence taken over by CGI doubles. I cannot tell you how many times I have watched a fight sequence where they switch to CGI midway and it just really cheapens the scene. It was fantastic to see these actors and stunt doubles do it themselves, and so organically, might I add. It looked more genuine and therefore more awesome, and you could absolutely tell that everyone had worked their asses off to make everything so flawless. I mean, Sebastian Stan even went so far as to walk around practicing his moves on set with a plastic knife the entirety of filming so his movements would feel more natural, and there were several scenes with him as Bucky where I just genuinely thought he was a force to be reckoned with, but damn did he look super cool in a super threatening way. But anytime you have an actor super dedicated to their role, it's bound to show, and it just so happens that this was the case for the majority of the lead roles. I have to start with Anthony Mackie because he was definitely the most hardcore case for this film. The guy wanted to be in the MCU so badly that he just kept on emailing Marvel for the chance to play literally any role as any comic character to appear in any one of the movies. And it worked. One of his emails made it in front of producer Kevin Feige, who offered him the role of Falcon. It's kind of cool to see a total fanboy make it into these movies and fulfill his dreams of doing so, and that was very clearly shown in his portrayal of Sam Wilson as well. Sam's character geeked out in the first few meetings with Steve, and every time he realized he was able to help them out, one of his lines was even, "Dude, Captain America needs my help. There's no better reason to get back in." And I think a huge part of the reason he looked so excited was because he was able to channel his own legitimate personal excitement to be in this very film. I also have to mention that it was awesome to see a completely capable fanboy character as well. I really appreciated the fact that Sam not only held his own, but was a hugely important part of the team to take down Hydra and subsequently become an Avenger. I also felt the same way about Natasha. I like that she too kicked ass and did not have one of those cliched heroine moments where one of the stronger male leads has to come in and save her ass. I mean, the woman gets shot in her left shoulder and still launches a frickin' grenade launcher at Bucky when Steve gets cornered. Screw being out for the count with a serious injury, she still keeps on going. I think the only time she does need that kind of borderline assist is when Steve carries her out of the rubble at the old military camp, but I think anyone but a super soldier jacked up on superhero juice would be rendered unconscious from being tossed around after being bombed several times and needs said jacked up superhero soldier to carry them out. The point is, they didn't damsel in distress her character and they let her be as badass as the dude superheroes. It was also neat to learn that Scarlett Johansson and Chris Evans wrote the dialogue for a lot of their scenes together, which made a lot of sense to me after the fact because I thought their chemistry as partners on the run was pretty good. Though, I do have to say that Steve's fake laugh in the mall was one of the most awkward laughs I have ever heard in my life. Another little dialogue Easter egg lies with Samuel L. Jackson's character Nick Fury in the scene where he tells Steve the story of his grandfather, the elevator operator. Turns out that Samuel's actual grandfather was in fact an elevator operator. Kind of neat to throw that in there, and I have almost no doubt that Samuel had a hand in that part of the script, like Scarlett and Chris. And if you've seen Pulp Fiction, you probably thought the epitaph on Nick Fury's grave looked familiar, as it was the favorite verse of Samuel's character Jules Winfield, which reads, "The path of the righteous man," Ezekiel 25:17. Circling back around to grandfathers, I know, weird segue, Robert Redfield, who plays the villainous Alexander Pierce, was super pumped to be a part of the Winter Soldier since his grandkids were huge Marvel fans and he wanted them to see him in the MCU. He also said he really wanted to play the villain since he rarely ever gets cast as one. Some people want to be the superhero, some want to be the villain. Rock on, Robert. All in all, there were a whole bunch of actors excited to be a part of this movie, and it really showed in their performances. The movie just felt really safe, and not as exciting story-wise as some of the others out there, and I think that's because, like I mentioned earlier, this movie was really meant to push a pretty important piece of the narrative for the overarching MCU storyline, and not focus too much on a story for Steve. I'm just happy that Nick Fury's car chase sequence was actually entertaining and fun to watch instead of a long ride to boredom. So, does this movie still hold up today? Most definitely. For starters, this was only made 10 years ago, so everything is still pretty fresh and relatively new. The special effects are great and don't dull in comparison to today's best of the best, and the vast majority of the actors in this film are current big names that the average household is familiar with. With all of the movies and TV show Marvel continues to release and has plans to release, the fact that this movie is a part of the MCU's repertoire will keep people going back to watch it so they can keep up with this extensive series, thereby keeping it as popular as ever. I also think that the plot point of Hydra letting AI and data patterns make the selection of their targets versus going in with manpower to make these decisions instead makes this film even more relevant now than ever, as AI seems to increasingly be taking over. Where Hydra's level of AI in the movie was a little more advanced for 2014, the way it's progressing nowadays makes it feel completely and totally more feasible. But how did it do during its release? With a budget of $170 million, The Winter Soldier generated an overall domestic revenue of $259,766,572 at the box office. This was the highest grossing film in monthly earnings as well, with April earnings at $228,529,867, making it the first movie we've seen to do this in the series, so congrats to Cap and the rest of the Super Squad. I think this is going to be the standard for most, if not all, of our 2014 films winning their highest monthly earnings category due to the production value and budgets increasing with the more recent films. It just makes sense that these movies are going to see a bigger return, but who knows? Maybe we'll have a dark horse rear its head to take a win or two. I know this week's video was slightly different, but I'd love to hear your opinions on this film. Did you think Nick Fury's car chase was actually too long? What's your favorite Phase 2 Marvel movie? Should Bucky bring back the eyeliner? Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next month back in May 1984.
Don't say it. Don't you say it.
Left.
Come on!